They say time heals all wounds, but some wounds don't scar over. They fester, they rot from the inside out, poisoning everything you are, everything you thought you knew. My brother, Caleb, was the strong one in our family, the rock. But when our parents forced him to choose between family loyalty and the love of his life, he didn't just break, he shattered. And in the silence that followed, something else crept in to pick up the pieces. Something cold, something possessive, something that should have stayed buried. Our family was what you'd call stable. 4 kids, a home paid for by years of my parents' hard work in the local hardware business, and a clear path for all of us. My eldest sister, Jessica, was already married. My other sister, Sarah, and I, Leah, the youngest, were still figuring things out. But my brother, Caleb, was the anchor. He was the third born, the only son, and the one who inherited my father's ambition, but sharpened it with his own edge.
He didn't want to just take over the family business. He wanted to build something of his own. So, with a loan from our parents, he opened a feed and grain supply store on the edge of town. It was a proper big place, smelling of fresh hay and earth. Within 2 years, he'd not only paid our parents back in full, but had turned the store into a thriving local hub. The business was his, free and clear.
Success like that, combined with his quiet confidence and rugged good looks, made him a magnet for attention. Half the single women in Havenwood must have found a reason to buy birdseed or fertilizer from him. He was always polite, always professional, but completely uninterested. His focus was singular. His heart, we thought, was reserved, and we soon found out why.
One Sunday, Caleb brought a woman home. Her name was Elara. She was from a town a few hours away, a place called Bridgewater. And she was, in a word, stunning. Not just beautiful, but radiant, with a laugh that filled the entire house. He introduced her as his girlfriend, and I could see immediately how gone he was on her. She said her family ran a large grocery wholesale business. I liked her instantly. My parents, they seemed to at first. The mood shifted during dinner. It was subtle, a sudden chill in the air when my father asked Elara for her parents' names. He recognized them. The friendly questions stopped. The atmosphere grew thick and heavy with unspoken history. Elara, to her credit, handled the awkwardness with grace, but the evening was cut short. Caleb drove her home, and the moment the sound of his truck faded, the judgment began.
"You will not see that woman again." My father's voice was low, dangerous. "You will not marry into that family. Ever." Caleb was stunned. "Why? What are you talking about?" And so the story came tumbling out, a story from before Sarah and I were even born. Elara's parents weren't just anyone. They were my parents' old business partners. They had pooled their money to invest in a large tract of land on the outskirts of the city. My parents, trusting their friends, had been careless with the paperwork. Years later, when a developer came calling for a life-changing offer for that land, the betrayal was revealed. The documents showed that Elara's family held a 2/3 share. My parents, who had put in half the capital, were legally entitled to only 1/3. It led to arguments, screaming matches, even a physical altercation in the street. In the end, the law was on their side. My parents had to accept the devastating loss. They had been neighbors. After the betrayal, my parents used what money they had to move, to put as much distance as possible between our family and theirs. They swore an oath that day they would never share the same sky with those people again. It was a deep, venomous wound that had never healed. And we, the children,
had known nothing about it.
It's not their fault. It's not Elara's fault, Caleb argued, his voice cracking with desperation. That was a lifetime ago. But for my father, it might as well have been yesterday. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, he spat. I will not have that blood in this family. If you disobey me, you are no longer my son. The finality in his voice was absolute. Caleb was forbidden from contacting Elara. All of us knew our brother's stubborn streak. We knew he wouldn't just obey. He would find a way. He had to. We were sure he was still seeing her in secret, sneaking out to Bridgewater, keeping the flame alive against the hurricane of our family's past. Then one evening he came home looking like a ghost. He was shattered. It was a deeper, hollower despair than when my father had laid down his ultimatum. He collapsed into a kitchen chair and just stared at the wall, not speaking, not seeing us. After what felt like an hour of suffocating silence, he finally looked at our parents. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. Do you know any single women? Find someone for me. I want to get married. My parents were stunned, but a wave of relief washed over them. They saw this as a victory, a sign that their stubborn son had finally seen the light. They were so desperate to see him settled, to have grandchildren to dote on, that they didn't question the terrifying emptiness in his eyes. A friend of my mother's from her church group had a daughter. Her name was Grace. She was known to be quiet, kind, and from a respectable family. A meeting was arranged. Caleb was cold, distant, barely making eye contact. He was a block of ice. I was certain Grace's family would be insulted and call the whole thing off. But, for reasons I couldn't fathom, they agreed. Perhaps Grace, in her quiet way, was taken with the broken, handsome man in front of her. The day before the wedding, my father took him aside. Caleb, be honest with me. What happened? Why the sudden change of heart? This time the story came out, a torrent of pain and humiliation.
She was cheating on me. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. The whole time. I drove to her house to convince her to run away with me, to hell with what our families thought. When I got there, I saw her with another guy. They were coming back from a date, holding hands, looking at each other the way she used to look at me. He said he confronted her. He ran up to them, demanding to know what was going on. She told me he was her new boyfriend, Caleb choked out. She said I was her old one now. She looked at me, cold as ice, and said she could tell my parents would never accept her anyway. She told me to go home and find someone else. Then she just waved goodbye and walked off with him. The betrayal had broken him, but it had also filled him with a cold, hard rage. I want to get married to hurt her, he confessed. I want her to see I've moved on. I trust your judgment now. You can pick my wife. Love can come later. Right now, I just want someone loyal. My parents, hearing this, nodded sagely. They saw it as confirmation of their beliefs. See, my mother said softly, people with bad character can't raise good children. Don't you worry, son. Grace is a wonderful girl. She's beautiful, she's devoted. She will be a good wife to you, you'll see. And so the wedding happened. It was a formal, joyless affair. Caleb moved through it like a robot, his eyes vacant. He never mentioned Elara's name again. His life with Grace began. Their married life was eerily quiet.
There were no fights, no arguments, but there was also no laughter, no conversation, no warmth. It was like two strangers sharing a house.
They lived in a state of peaceful, silent misery. Over a year passed. There was no news of a baby, no hint of their relationship thawing.
One afternoon, my sister Jessica came to visit and found Grace alone, weeping silently in the kitchen. Gently, Jessica asked if they were using protection, if they weren't ready for children yet. That's when the dam broke. "He's never touched me," Grace confessed through her tears, her voice thick with shame and a year's worth of loneliness. "How can I have a baby when he won't even come near me? We've been married for over a year, and I'm still a virgin."
Jessica was speechless. "What do you mean? Has he said why?" "He told me once," Grace whispered, "right after the wedding. He said he couldn't be with me until he truly loved me. He promised that my sincerity, my devotion would eventually win his heart. I believed him. I've spent every single day for more than a year trying to break through the ice, but it's no use. His heart is frozen. There's no room for me in it."
She had suffered in silence, too ashamed to tell anyone, too bound by her traditional upbringing to consider leaving him. The thought of bringing shame upon her family was more unbearable than her own private misery. Around this time, Caleb's behavior grew stranger. He started leaving early and coming home late. Before, he'd work at the store all day and be home by dinner. Now, he was neglecting the business entirely.
Grace would ask where he'd been, and he wouldn't answer. My parents, getting worried, confronted him. He just said he was out on personal business. When they pressed him for details, he would go silent and walk away. Then he disappeared for 10 straight days. He didn't come home at all. Panicked, my parents went to the feed store, but it was locked up tight, day after day. They were determined to find him, to shake some sense into him for abandoning his business and his wife.
They found him at a coffee shop downtown, sitting by himself, staring into a cold cup of coffee.
My parents approached his table, their faces a mixture of anger and desperate concern. "Caleb," my father's voice was strained, "what are you doing? Your wife is worried sick. The store has been closed for over a week." Caleb didn't look up. He just shrugged. "The things I do are my own business. I don't need you to worry about it." The insolence, the sheer dismissiveness in his tone was something my father had never tolerated. I'd seen my father angry before, but this was different. It was the anger of helplessness. His hand flew across the table and cracked against Caleb's face. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet cafe. Caleb's head barely moved. He didn't react, didn't show pain or anger. He just slowly stood up, placed a few bills on the table for his coffee, and walked out. My parents, bewildered, followed him. He didn't get in his truck. He just started walking, turning down side streets and alleys, wandering aimlessly. As they trailed behind, keeping their distance, they heard it. A low murmuring. Caleb was talking. Not to himself. It didn't sound like that. It sounded like a conversation. They could hear the gentle rising and falling cadence of someone speaking to a companion. But there was no one there. The street was empty, except for the three of them. "He's probably just muttering, cursing us under his breath," my father whispered to my mother, trying to find a rational explanation. But his voice lacked conviction. The son who walked ahead of them was a stranger.
That night set a new, terrifying precedent. The situation didn't improve, it worsened. Caleb was a ghost in his own life, sometimes not coming home for weeks. He was unreachable. And then, the outside world started to confirm our worst fears. One afternoon, Brenda, the woman who owned the coffee shop at the end of our street, paid my mother a visit. Brenda was a notorious gossip, but she seemed genuinely unnerved. "Ma'am," she began, twisting a dish towel in her hands, "I don't mean to pry, but is Caleb all right? Is there something different about him?" My mother asked her what she meant. "Well," Brenda said, leaning closer, "for the past few weeks, he comes to my place every single afternoon, every day, but he doesn't come from the direction of your house or his store. He comes from the direction of the old highway. And every time he orders 2 coffees, one iced black and one caramel latte." My mother's blood ran cold. "He sits there by himself, but he talks and laughs and jokes as if someone is right there with him. An entire, detailed conversation. And when he leaves, this is the part that gives me goosebumps. His right arm is always held out, kind of crooked, like he has it wrapped around someone's shoulder. It's the same way when he walks in. I had to say something. Looking at him, it makes my skin crawl. I'm almost afraid to serve him anymore."
My mother thanked her for the concern, her voice trembling. After Brenda left, she and my father sat in silence. A man talking to himself could be stress, but ordering 2 specific drinks every day, holding an invisible person, this was something else. This was a detailed, consistent delusion. My sister Sarah suggested we tail him to see if what Brenda said was true. The word of a gossip wasn't always reliable. We decided that the next day, my parents would go to his store early and follow him.
But they didn't have to wait. As they were leaving the house the next morning, they ran into our old neighbor, Mr. Henderson, heading out for his morning walk. After exchanging pleasantries, he got a serious look on his face. "Say," he said, "your boy Caleb, what's he up to these days? He's shut the store, and every night I see him out on the park benches in front of my place, just sitting there in the dark talking up a storm to nobody. I saw him there last night. When I stepped out on my porch, he jumped up like he'd been caught, and I swear I heard him say clear as day, 'Come on, honey, let's go before he sees us.' It gave me the chills. Your son, it's like he's possessed by a demon or something. You folks should get him checked out." This was the final straw. Mr. Henderson was the most serious, no-nonsense man on the block. He wasn't the type to exaggerate or gossip. The story from Brenda could have been embellished, but coming from him, it was a cold, hard fact. 2 different people describing the same impossible behavior. The half-believed theory that he was simply having an affair was evaporating, replaced by a much darker possibility. Was he losing his mind?
"That's it," my father said, his voice grim. "We're going to the store now. We'll see for ourselves." They drove over immediately. The store was still locked. Thankfully, my father had a spare key. He slid it into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open.
The stench hit them first. A putrid wave of rot and decay. The place, it wasn't a store anymore. It was a rat's nest. My parents stood there, utterly horrified. Caleb, who had always been so meticulous, so clean, how could he live like this? Half-eaten instant noodle cups were scattered everywhere, their contents blooming with green and black mold. Cobwebs as thick as gauze hung from the rafters. The sacks of grain had split, their contents spilling onto the floor, smelling sour and attracting insects. There was a palpable feeling of cold, of filth, of something deeply unwell.
There wasn't a single clean place to sit. "Is this what happens when a man has an affair?" my mother asked. "The empty, foul-smelling room. He becomes a complete slob?" My father, trying to cut through the tension, grunted. "How would I know? I've never had one." "You want one now?" she shot back, a flash of their old banter returning even in this nightmare. "At my age, you think I have the energy? You're more than enough trouble for me," he said. It was a weak attempt at a joke, but it was something. A brief, flickering candle in the suffocating darkness of that room. As they were talking, the back door creaked open and Caleb shuffled in. He looked right through them. It was the most terrifying thing my parents had ever seen. They were standing right there in the middle of the room, and he didn't see them. It was as if they were ghosts and he was the living one. He didn't say a word, didn't acknowledge the two people calling his name. He walked straight to the old hammock strung up in the back room and collapsed into it, falling instantly into a deep, death-like sleep.
"He's sick," my father said, his voice hollow. "This isn't just grief. His mind is gone." My mother looked at Caleb's gaunt, pale face, at his skeletal frame lost in the hammock. Then she looked at the evidence from the neighbors and the invisible companion he seemed so devoted to. A colder, more ancient fear began to take root in her heart. "Or maybe," she whispered, "it's not that his mind is gone. Maybe something has found him. He has never, not once, been seen with another living person, only with her." They knew then. This wasn't a case for a doctor. It was a case for someone else entirely. They would let him sleep, but they would watch, and they would wait for the evening to see where his lonely pilgrimage would take him next.
While Caleb slept his death-like sleep, my parents made a decision. They hired a professional cleaning crew for an emergency overnight job. They couldn't let him live in this squalor. As the cleaners scrubbed and disinfected, my mother stayed, watching over her son, her heart aching with a fear she couldn't name. The shop was scrubbed clean by the time the sun began to set, the air thick with the smell of bleach instead of decay. It was then, as dusk settled, that my parents saw it. It was a flicker, a smudge of white in the corner of their vision, zipping past them with impossible speed. It was there and gone before they could even register what it was, a streak of cold air in its wake. It moved towards the back room where Caleb was. My parents rushed after it. They found Caleb stirring, waking up. He still didn't see them. He stretched and then smiled at the empty air beside the hammock. "Hey, sleepyhead," he whispered. "Did you have a nice nap? Come on, get yourself ready. You know what time it is." He paused, as if listening to a reply. I know, a caramel latte at Brenda's place, then the bench by the park to watch the stars, your favorite. You act like I'd ever forget." My parents stood frozen in the doorway, their blood turning to ice. He was getting dressed, getting ready for his date. They slipped out of the store and got into their car, waiting. A moment later, Caleb locked up the clean shop and got into his truck. They followed. It happened exactly as Brenda and Mr. Henderson had described. He went to the coffee shop, bought 2 drinks, he drove to the park, sat on a bench under the old oak tree, and carried on his silent conversation, occasionally laughing at a joke only he could hear. But tonight, he didn't go home after that. He got back in his truck and drove on. My parents followed him out of town, down a dark country road that led to the old Havenwood Cemetery. Their hearts pounded in their chests. Caleb parked his truck, got out, and walked through the iron gates. Hiding behind a row of ancient tombstones, my parents watched as their son navigated the sea of graves until he stopped at one in a secluded corner. And then he lay down on the grass beside it.
What they saw next broke them. He began to talk to the grave, his voice full of love and affection. He stroked the cold earth as if it were a lover's skin. He leaned in, his body hovering over the grave, his movements a sickening pantomime of an embrace, of kisses being lavished upon cold, empty air. My mother let out a strangled sob, and my father had to clamp his hand over her mouth to keep her from screaming. Her body shook with silent, horrified tears. This was Dwiam, a spiritual attachment. Their son was in a relationship with the dead. They watched for what felt like an eternity until exhaustion and sheer emotional devastation overtook them, and they fell into a fitful sleep in their car.
When they awoke, the sun was rising. Caleb was gone. Shaking, they got out of the car and walked towards the grave that had been their son's partner for the night. They looked down at the tombstone, and the world fell out from under them. The picture etched into the marble was of the beautiful, smiling girl Caleb had brought home all that time ago, Elara. And below the name, the dates. She had died nearly a year ago, just 2 months after Caleb and Grace's wedding.
My parents came home and told my sister Sarah and me everything. We were beyond horrified, while they desperately started asking around for anyone who dealt with things like this. Sarah and I went out, determined to see it for ourselves. We found him at Brenda's coffee shop. He sat at an outdoor table. In his hand, he held a caramel latte, and he was scooping it up spoonful by spoonful and tipping it gently towards the empty air over the table, letting the liquid drip down onto the ground. "There you go," we heard him murmur. "Don't drink too fast." The other customers stared and whispered, some laughing cruelly. My skin crawled, the hair on my arms standing on end. We tried to get him to come home, but he just gave us a dead-eyed stare and told us to leave him alone. Finally, through a distant connection, my parents found a woman. She was a medium, a spiritualist who specialized in these exact kinds of attachments. She was expensive, but they were desperate. They brought her to the now-cleaned feed store. The moment she stepped inside, she shivered. "The negative energy here is thick," she said, her voice low. "The spirit has spent a lot of time here. It feels possessive." She told them to buy fruit, incense, and candles. She was going to perform the severance right here.
The medium needed a vessel, a blood relative for the spirit to speak through. My mother, terrified but resolute, agreed. She sat in a chair as the medium lit the candles and began to chant in a language we didn't understand. For a long time, nothing happened. Then my mother's head began to nod, slowly, rhythmically. She slumped forward and then snapped her head up.
It was my mother's face, but the expression was entirely wrong. Her eyes were sharp, defiant, and a little amused. A slow, cold smile spread across her lips.
"What do you people want?"
The voice was my mother's, but the tone, the confidence, the arrogance, it was Elara. "Why are you clinging to this man?" the medium asked, gesturing to where Caleb lay sleeping in the hammock. The thing wearing my mother's face laughed. "Clinging? We're in love. We're together. That's not a crime. His parents and my parents tore us apart. I had to pretend to have a new boyfriend just to get them off my back. But he saw, and he misunderstood. He left me. He married someone else." The voice cracked with a phantom pain. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just faded away.
I died 2 months after his wedding, but I couldn't leave him. I found him. At first, he could only feel me. Then he could see me. We're happy together. What's wrong with that?
Look at him, the medium said, her voice sharp. Love is not a sin, but you are killing him. He is a ghost among the living. In his eyes there is nothing but you. If you truly love him, you must release him. Let him live. Let your own soul find peace. For the first time, the spirit faltered. My mother's face crumpled and she began to sob. Deep, wrenching sobs of a love lost twice. After a long moment, she nodded.
The medium took out a yellow paper talisman, drew on it with the smoke of the incense, and chanted. As she folded it into a small packet, she commanded, "You may leave now." My mother's body went rigid and then collapsed backward into the chair, limp. The ordeal was over. The spirit was contained.
We brought Caleb home. The first few days, he was in a stupor, lost in a feverish haze. And through it all, Grace was there. She never left his side. We all thought she would be angry, resentful, but she wasn't. "He is my husband," she said simply. "It is my duty to care for him." She fed him broth, cooled his fever, and sat with him through the long nights.
Slowly the life returned to his eyes. As he regained his strength, he started watching her. He heard her quiet words of comfort. He felt her gentle touch. And for the first time, he truly saw the woman he had married. He saw her strength, her boundless forgiveness, her selfless love. And in the ashes of his old obsession, a new, quieter, and far more real love began to grow.
2 months later, when he was fully recovered, he took Grace's hand and drove her to the cemetery. Together they placed fresh flowers on Elara's grave. "Elara," he said, his voice clear and steady, "I've found my happiness now. Please rest in peace. Find your own. I'll never forget our beautiful memories, but that chapter is closed."
From that day forward, Caleb and Grace truly began their life together. Their love was deep and real. They expanded the feed store, turning it into the biggest supplier in the county. And in time, their quiet house was filled with the loud, happy shouts of 2 healthy sons. It was a beautiful ending to a story that began in the darkest of places, a testament that sometimes true love isn't the one that consumes you, but the one that patiently waits to heal you.